To my sister, the hero of the keyboard, my brother toasted, and the bar of pilots roared with laughter. My father slapped his back, adding, "Son, every family of eagles needs a house pet." I said nothing. They had no idea my keyboard commanded the very sky they flew in. This is the story of how I finally forced them to look up. My name is Colonel Emily Carter, and I am 32 years old. From my corner table in the I-bar, the entire world felt sticky, with the smell of stale lager and thick with the arrogant laughter of Navy pilots. This place, a famed watering hole on Naval Air Station, North Island, was their sanctuary. Tonight, it was my personal hell. I sat alone, my untouched glass of unsweetened iced tea, sweating onto a frayed cardboard coaster. All around me, men in green flight suits were a vibrant, roaring tribe, their hands gesturing wildly as they retold stories of the sky, of pulling G's that would make a normal person black out, of dancing on the edge of oblivion and returning as heroes. They belonged here, I did not. The dim golden light of the bar glinted off the silver eagle pinned to my collar, the rank of a full colonel in the United States Space Force. But here it was invisible. The polished metal meant nothing in a room dedicated to the flesh and blood gods of the air. They didn't see my rank, they only saw my brother, Jake, standing in the center of it all, the gravitational center of their universe. He was the star of the evening, a newly decorated F-35 pilot, his call sign Viper whispered with reverence. He was the sun, radiating charm and confidence. And I was just a distant, cold planet, trapped in his orbit, but belonging to no system of my own. I was an analyst, a strategist. My battlefield was a constellation of data points and satellite trajectories. A silent, sterile war fought thousands of miles above their heads. To them, it wasn't real. The first volley came from Jake's best friend and wingman, Captain Tom Hollywood Harris. He swaggered over, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "Hey, Emily," he called out, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Any sunshine out at Vandenberg, or is it just the blue light from your monitors?" A few scattered snickers rippled through the crowd. It was the opening act, the warm-up for the main event. Jake, never one to be upstaged, seized the moment. He raised his half-empty mug of beer high, silencing the room with the gesture. His voice, practiced and powerful, boomed across the bar. "Everyone, a toast to my sister, the hero of the status report, the colonel of Microsoft Office." The snickers exploded into a full-blown roar of laughter. It crashed over me in a wave, hot and suffocating. I felt dozens of eyes on me, and not one of them held a shred of respect. It was a look I knew all too well, a condescending pity, the kind you give to a child who tried to play an adult's game and failed. They weren't looking at a fellow officer, they were looking at a punchline. And I was it. I kept my back straight, my expression a carefully constructed mask of indifference. Years in the military teach you to control your face, even when your insides are twisting into knots. But the deepest cut, the one that truly found its mark, didn't come from a stranger or a rival. It came from my father. He stood beside Jake, his face flushed with beer and a blinding paternal pride. He was a retired A-10 Warthog pilot, a veteran of the Gulf War, a man carved from the Southern belief that glory was earned only in a cockpit, smelling of jet fuel and adrenaline. He clapped Jake on the back, a hard, resounding slap that I heard clearly over the din. "In a family of eagles, son," he declared, his voice thick with a Georgia drawl. "It's okay to have one factory chicken." The words were a bullet. They tore straight through the armor I'd spent years building, piece by meticulous piece. A factory chicken, caged, useless, raised for slaughter. My breath hitched in my throat. I saw the triumphant gleam in Jake's eyes as he soaked in our father's approval. He didn't just tolerate the humiliation, he reveled in it. It solidified his place as the true heir to our family's legacy. There's a special kind of silence that falls after your own father publicly dismisses your entire existence. A quiet ringing in your ears as the world continues to laugh around you. If you've ever felt that sting, the one that comes not from an enemy, but from your own blood, drop a like on this story, so I know I'm not the only one who's been there. Inside my head, I desperately clung to a lifeline. A quote from a woman who was a legend in both the Navy and computer science, Rear Admiral Grace Hopper. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is to get permission. For years, that had been my mantra, my shield. It was the philosophy that had propelled me through MIT, through officer training, through the male-dominated halls of the Space Force. It was what I told myself every time my family questioned my path. But tonight, the shield felt impossibly thin. I raised my glass, the condensation cold against my trembling fingers. I took a slow, deliberate swallow of my tea. The bitterness that flooded my throat was suddenly sharp, familiar. Achingly so. It tasted exactly like that humid afternoon in Atlanta, all those years ago, the very first time they took a piece of my hope and crushed it right in front of my eyes. The bitter aftertaste of my iced tea in that noisy San Diego bar was a ghost, a phantom flavor that transported me, 15 years into the past, to a sweltering summer afternoon in Buckhead, Atlanta. The memory bloomed in perfect, painful detail. It was the day I learned that in my family, some victories were not meant to be celebrated. Our backyard was a shrine to my brother. The humid air, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and hickory smoke from my father's barbecue pit, was buzzing with the cheerful chatter of neighbors and friends. Between two ancient oak trees, a massive banner proclaimed in bold blue and gold letters, "Go Navy, go Jake." Everyone was there to celebrate Jake's acceptance into the U.S. Naval Academy. My father, a man who saw the world through the canopy of his old A-10 Warthog, was in his element. He wore a faded apron with a cartoon drawing of his beloved plane on the front, and he paced before the grill like a general reviewing his troops. He held court, his voice booming with pride as he recounted Jake's achievements on the football field, his leadership in school, his destiny in the sky. People swarmed around Jake, clapping him on the back, handing him ice-cold Cokes, all of them talking about the Georgia Bulldogs' upcoming season and how Jake was the kind of hero they bred in the South. He was the center of their universe, a sun king in his own court. And then there was me. I was 17, just back from a national competition in Washington, D.C. I stood on the edge of the manicured lawn in a simple floral sundress, my hands clutching a stiff, embossed certificate. It was the award for first place in the National Satellite Programming Invitational, a prize that came with a full scholarship, my golden ticket, to MIT. In my world, this was everything. In theirs, I was invisible. I watched them for what felt like an hour, my achievement feeling heavier and more foolish in my hands with every passing minute. Finally, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and approached my father. He was basting a massive rack of ribs, the smoke stinging my eyes. "Dad," I began, my voice barely a whisper against the sizzle of the grill. I got something." I held out the certificate. He glanced down, his eyes scanning the formal script for less than a second. The nod he gave me was faster than a blink, a twitch of acknowledgement before his attention returned to the ribs. "That's nice, honey," he said, his focus absolute. "Now take that inside, will you? It doesn't really fit the mood out here." He took the certificate from my grasp, not with the careful hands of a proud father, but with the dismissive air of someone handling an inconvenience, a piece of clutter. He didn't even look at me as he turned and thrust it into my mother's hands. "Here, hold this," he grunted, and then turned back to his kingdom of smoke and meat. The casualness of his dismissal hurt more than 1,000 angry words ever could. It wasn't just a piece of paper he'd brushed aside, it was my future. His gesture screamed a terrible, silent truth. "Your accomplishments don't count. Your victory is not this family's glory." My mother, ever the peacemaker, guided me away from the hub of the party and into the cool quiet of the kitchen. The air conditioning was a relief against my flushed skin, but the chill in the room went deeper. She placed my certificate on the granite countertop, right next to a stack of paper plates and a roll of paper towels. An afterthought. "Emily, darling," she said, her voice a soft, syrupy southern melody, the kind that could soothe any trouble, or so I'd always believed. "I have something for you, too." She opened a drawer and pulled out a book with a homespun, cloth-bound cover. She pressed it into my hands. The title read, "Southern Living's Greatest Hits." A real man, whether he's a pilot or a president, always appreciates a good home-cooked meal from his wife, she said, her eyes smiling but her words weaving the bars of a beautiful, gilded cage. She didn't see me. She didn't see a future scientist, an engineer, a woman who dreamed of algorithms and orbits. She saw a potential wife whose greatest contribution would be a perfectly baked pecan pie. My father often quoted the Bible, twisting scripture to fit his worldview. His favorite was Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you." He used it as a divine mandate to impose his own plans on his children. His plan for Jake was the sky. His plan for me, I now realized, was a kitchen. But as I stood there, clutching that cookbook, I reinterpreted that verse for myself. Maybe God's plan for me was different from my father's. Maybe it was a plan so far beyond their imagination that they simply couldn't see it. That night, long after the guests had gone and the smell of smoke had faded, I sat in my room and cried. Not from sadness, but from the sharp, painful clarity of revelation. I finally understood. The path I had chosen, the one that led to stars and code, was a path I would have to walk utterly and completely alone. The memory dissolved, leaving me back in the eye-bar. The ice in my glass melted, the laughter of the pilots still echoing around me, and I realized with a cold certainty that settled deep in my bones that nothing had changed. 15 years, a colonel's rank, and a career spent protecting men like them, and they still saw me as that same girl in a sundress, holding an award that didn't matter. The decision I made that night in Atlanta, the quiet acceptance of my solitary path, led me to Vandenberg Space Force Base on the central coast of California. My first days there felt just as cold and gray as the thick Pacific fog that perpetually smothered the coastline. This wasn't the sun-drenched, glamorous California of postcards. It was a place of stark, functional beauty and relentless, chilling winds. I was a brand-new second lieutenant, fresh out of MIT, and the only woman on the initial analysis team at the Combined Space Operations Center, or CSPOC. The CSPOC was the brain of America's military space operations, a vast, dimly lit room dominated by an enormous screen displaying the orbital paths of thousands of satellites, a silent, swirling dance of data. It was awe-inspiring, a cathedral dedicated to the cosmos. But my corner of it felt less like a cathedral and more like a retirement home. I was surrounded by men, most of them senior officers, who were counting the days until they could trade their uniforms for golf shirts. They saw this assignment not as the future of warfare, but as a final, quiet stop before collecting their pensions. They called me the MIT kid. It wasn't a compliment, it was a label, a way to diminish me, to put me in a box they could understand. The isolation was profound. I'd work 12-hour shifts staring at data streams, then return to a sterile apartment that echoed with silence. The weekly phone calls home offered no comfort. My father's first question was always the same. "So when are you putting in for a transfer to a base with actual airplanes?" He couldn't grasp a military career that didn't involve a cockpit. My mother, on the other hand, filled the calls with her usual anxieties. "All those men, Emily, you be careful. Are you eating enough? You sound tired." They never once asked about the algorithms I was developing or the orbital mechanics problems I was solving. They only heard my loneliness, not my purpose. In those early days, I found solace in the words of Carl Sagan. I'd read my worn paperback copy of Cosmos under a single lamp in my quiet apartment. Sagan's perspective was a lifeline. He wrote about a universe of breathtaking scale and wonder, a place where petty human prejudices seemed laughably insignificant. His words, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known," became my private motivation. It was a reminder that my work had a purpose, even if no one around me could see it. My first real test came a few months into my assignment. A critical military communications satellite, callsign Condor 7, had started periodically losing its signal. It was a ghost, disappearing from our network for unpredictable intervals before reappearing. The senior engineers were stumped. They ran their standard diagnostics and came up empty, grumbling about faulty hardware and budget cuts. I knew it was something else. I took the problem home with me, not literally, but in my head. For 3 straight nights, I barely slept. I lived on black coffee, brewed to the consistency of motor oil, and stale peanut butter crackers from the office vending machine. I sat at my station long after everyone else had gone home, the only light in the cavernous room coming from the blue glow of my monitor. I wrote a complex diagnostic script from scratch, a piece of code designed to hunt for anomalies not in the hardware, but in the satellite's behavior. On the 3rd night, around 3 a.m., I found it. It wasn't a hardware failure. It was an infinitesimal flaw in the thermal regulation software. Every time Condor 7 passed into the Earth's shadow, the sudden temperature drop would cause the primary transmitter to temporarily freeze, a tiny electronic frostbite. The system would reboot, but for 12 critical minutes, we were blind and deaf. I felt a quiet, fierce surge of pride. I had done it! The next morning, I presented my findings to my commanding officer, a colonel on the verge of retirement, whose primary interest was perfecting his golf swing. I laid out the data, the code, the irrefutable logic. He stared at my report, blinked slowly, and then mumbled without making eye contact, "All right, kid, send it over to the engineering department." And that was it. No thank you, no good work, Lieutenant. Not even a flicker of recognition, just a wave of his hand, a dismissal. My incredible discovery, my 3 sleepless nights, were reduced to a memo he would forward and forget. The indifference was a physical weight. Things began to change the day Colonel Maria Lopez took command. She was a sharp, decisive Hispanic woman with eyes that missed nothing. She moved with an energy that seemed to shake the dust from the entire operations floor. One evening, months later, she was making her final rounds and found me still at my desk long after my shift had ended. I was running a simulation, a war game scenario, testing a new predictive model for a potential enemy satellite attack. She didn't ask why I was still there. She didn't comment on the late hour. She simply stopped, her eyes fixed on my screen. She studied the cascading lines of code and the probability vectors for a long moment. "You're using a hidden Markov model for your threat assessment, aren't you, Carter?" she asked, her voice calm and direct. I was stunned. I could only nod, my voice caught in my throat. For the first time since I'd arrived, someone had looked at my work and not just seen a screensaver. They had seen the intricate mathematics behind it. They understood the language I spoke. Colonel Lopez nodded slowly, a small knowing smile touching the corner of her lips. "Good, keep at it," she said. "I want to see the results on my desk in the morning." As she walked away, leaving me alone in the quiet hum of the servers, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't pride, not exactly. It was something brighter, more fragile. It was the first ray of light piercing through the dense Vandenberg fog. It was hope. The day the world almost ended for my brother began, like any other Tuesday at the CS Park. The air was cool and still, filled with the low, constant hum of server farms and the faint scent of sterilized air. It was a controlled, predictable environment, a stark contrast to the chaotic reality of warfare. On the massive, wall-sized screen before me, glowing green lines traced the elegant, silent paths of thousands of satellites, our eyes and ears in the heavens. For years, under the mentorship of Colonel Lopez, I had learned to read this celestial map not as a collection of objects, but as a living, breathing ecosystem of allies and adversaries. I was reviewing a power consumption report when Alex Reed, the sharpest young analyst on my team, called me over to his station. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wide. "Colonel, you need to see this." I leaned over his shoulder, my gaze fixed on his monitor. He had isolated a data stream from one of our most advanced reconnaissance satellites, Argus 4. It was reporting anomalous energy fluctuations, subtle but undeniable, emanating from a supposedly defunct enemy satellite. We called these sleeper satellites, assets that had been dormant for so long they were written off as space junk. But this piece of junk was waking up. "Where is it looking?" I asked, my voice low. Alex's fingers flew across his keyboard, pulling up a targeting trajectory. A cold knot formed in my stomach. The sleeper satellite was focusing its sensors on a precise patch of the Philippine Sea. My blood ran cold. Operation Pacific Dawn, a massive joint naval exercise, was currently underway in those exact coordinates, and participating in that exercise was my brother's F-35 squadron, the Vipers. My heart skipped a beat, a purely involuntary human reaction. I quickly suppressed it. Here in this room, I wasn't Jake's sister. I was Colonel Carter. Emotion was a liability we couldn't afford. "Run attack vector models," I commanded, my voice betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "Assume hostile intent. I want every possible scenario." "Yes, ma'am." Alex didn't question it. He just worked. The models populated the screen, each one a different shade of nightmare. The worst-case scenario, the one my gut told me was happening, became a terrifying reality. This sleeper wasn't just a camera. The energy signature was consistent with a directed energy weapon. A high-energy microwave beam, to be precise. It was invisible, silent, and powerful enough to instantly scramble, the fly-by-wire avionics of an F-35, effectively frying its brain. In the space of a single heartbeat, it could turn a fifth-generation fighter jet into a 40,000-pound metal coffin, sending it into an unrecoverable death spiral. And the target of this invisible weapon, the projected kill box on the screen, was centered directly on the Viper's operational area, my brother's operational area. A timer appeared in the corner of the simulation. Time to impact, 4 minutes. A quote from Theodore Roosevelt flashed through my mind, a phrase I'd leaned on in countless difficult moments. Do what you can, with what you have, where you are. I couldn't be in that cockpit. I couldn't warn Jake over the radio, but I was here, at Vandenberg, with command over a billion-dollar constellation of defensive assets. This was my battlefield, and I would fight. My mind raced through the options. I couldn't just call the fleet commander and yell, "Abort the mission. There's a space laser about to zap your planes." It would be a catastrophic breach of protocol, revealing our intelligence capabilities and causing mass panic based on data that was, until this very second, unverified. I had only one choice: neutralize the threat quietly, efficiently, and immediately. "Alex," I said, my voice as cold and steady as steel. "Retask Argus 4, authorize immediate engagement, execute protocol blinding light." Alex's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Blinding light was a top-secret countermeasure, a last resort. It used a precisely focused, low-yield laser from our own satellite to overwhelm the optical sensors of an enemy asset, effectively blinding it. The satellite wouldn't be destroyed, but it would be rendered useless, its targeting system completely fried. It was a surgical strike in a war no one could see. "Execute, Alex," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for hesitation. He nodded grimly and typed in the authorization codes. "Protocol initiated. Blinding light is a go." On the main screen, a tiny green line representing Argus 4 shifted its orientation. A new, hair-thin vector shot across the digital map, intersecting with the red icon of the hostile sleeper. For a moment, there was absolute silence on the operations floor. We were all holding our breath. Then, the secure phone on my desk let out a piercing shriek. It was a ship-to-shore line, a direct, encrypted link. My hand shook slightly as I picked it up. The connection was filled with static and the roar of a jet engine. And then a voice, panicked and furious, cut through the noise. It was Jake. "Emily, what the hell are you guys doing up there? My entire damn system just went haywire." Jake's voice crackled through the encrypted channel, a furious, static-laced accusation from halfway across the world. "My entire weapons system just went dark. The HUD is flickering like a Christmas tree. What the hell are you people testing in that damn center of yours? Do you have any idea I almost put this thing into the ocean?" I stood motionless in the frigid, controlled air of the CS pod, my hand gripping the secure phone. On the massive screen in front of me, a serene green line showed his F-35's flight path stable and secure. A few feet away, on Alex's monitor, a red icon representing the hostile satellite was blinking. Its status updated to neutralized. I had just saved his life, and his first instinct was to blame me. The irony was so sharp, so bitter, it almost made me laugh. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the surge of white-hot anger back down. I was a colonel, he was a major. This was an active channel during a sensitive operation. Protocol was everything. "Major Carter," I said, my voice deliberately flat, devoid of any emotion. I was speaking to an asset, not my brother. "I cannot discuss ongoing operations. Focus on your mission." A harsh, grating laugh echoed through the speaker. It sounded like metal scraping against stone. Focus? You're telling me to focus? You're sitting in an air-conditioned room, playing video games with billion-dollar satellites, and you almost killed me. You almost killed me. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He wasn't just questioning a technical glitch, he was questioning my very presence, my right to be in this room, to hold this rank. In his mind, I was still the girl from the barbecue, the one with the useless piece of paper. The imposter. "Tell me, Colonel," he sneered, dragging out my rank like it was an insult. "What's it like being in control of something you'll never, ever truly understand?" Every word was a perfectly aimed dagger, each one striking a wound that had never fully healed. He didn't just doubt my competence, he held my entire world, my life's work, in utter contempt. In his voice, I heard my father's dismissive tone, the mocking laughter of the pilots in the bar. They were all one and the same, a chorus of disbelief telling me I didn't belong. In that moment, I could have broken. I could have shattered every rule of operational security I had sworn to uphold. The words were right there, burning on the tip of my tongue. "You fool! I just saved you from a space-based weapons attack." That flicker was me blinding an enemy satellite that was seconds away from turning your jet into a fireball. I could have screamed it. I could have given myself the satisfaction of hearing the stunned, choked silence on the other end of the line. But I didn't. In the swirl of my anger, a strange clarity emerged. I thought of Abraham Lincoln during the darkest days of the Civil War, a man besieged by criticism from his own generals, from his cabinet, from a public that couldn't see the larger strategic picture. He endured the scorn, the misunderstanding, the profound loneliness of command, because his focus was on the ultimate objective, preserving the Union. He knew that true leadership wasn't about winning arguments, it was about winning the war. My war was different, quieter, but the principle was the same. Shouting at my ignorant brother would give me a moment of satisfaction, but it would compromise the mission. It would be an emotional outburst, not a strategic move. And I was a strategist. My silence, I realized, was the only weapon I had left. It was a shield, a statement, a refusal to engage on his terms. Let him sit in his ignorance. The truth didn't need me to scream it. The truth simply was. I glanced at Alex's screen one last time. The neutralized icon was a silent testament to what had really happened. Mission complete. "Major," I said, and my voice was no longer flat. It was glacial, a polar ice cap of controlled fury. "Terminate transmission." I pressed the button, cutting him off before he could utter another word. The sudden silence in my ear was deafening. I stood there for a long moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, as the adrenaline and the hurt and 15 years of accumulated frustration swirled within me. They didn't break me, they coalesced. All that chaotic energy, all that pain, hardened into a single, crystal-clear decision. Have you ever had to bite your tongue so hard you tasted blood, knowing that the real victory wasn't in winning the argument, but in waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth? If you have, give this a comment below. They were going to find out what happened today. Oh yes, the entire unvarnished truth would be brought into the light, but it wouldn't be through an angry, undignified phone call. It would be on my terms, and it would be undeniable. After I terminated the call, a profound calm settled over me. I didn't slam the phone down. The anger was still there, a white-hot core deep inside me. But it had moved beyond the simple release of rage. It had been compressed, distilled by years of quiet endurance into something far more potent, a cold, focused, and infinitely more dangerous resolve. My hands were perfectly steady. My mind was a razor. Ignoring the curious glances from my team, I walked with deliberate steps back to my workstation. I sat down, my posture perfect, and opened a new file. A red banner flashed across the top of the screen. Top secret sigh. This was the highest level of classification, a digital vault where words had the weight of law. My fingers moved over the keyboard with a steady, rhythmic cadence. There was no emotion in the movement, only methodical purpose. I typed the title After Action Report, Amuru Operation Pacific Dawn, Threat Neutralization 2000 Zulu. Then I began to build my fortress of facts. I documented everything with surgical precision. The exact time of the initial energy detection, 1956-14 Zulu. The precise orbital coordinates of the hostile satellite, designated X227b. The telemetry data, streamed from Argus 4 in neat, undeniable columns, showed the enemy assets' power cells charging to critical levels. I detailed my threat analysis, complete with probability models, explaining how the microwave beam would have induced catastrophic avionics failure. I documented the countermeasure I authorized, protocol blinding light, and the exact nanosecond it was executed. Finally, I typed the designation of the U.S. asset protected, call sign Viper, an F-35 squadron assigned to the USS Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group. Squadron Commander, Major Jake Carter. Each word I typed was a stone. I was not writing a story of personal grievance. I was building a monument to the unassailable truth, a structure so solid that no amount of arrogance could ever tear it down. As I wrote, I thought of Rosa Parks on that bus. Her power didn't come from a loud declaration, but from a quiet, unshakable refusal to move. She held her position and forced the world to confront its own injustice. My silence on the phone with Jake hadn't been weakness, it had been my own quiet refusal. I would not be moved from my position of truth. Once the report was complete, I triple-checked every detail, attached the raw data logs, and sent the encrypted file directly to Colonel Lopez. The subject line was simple. Urgent AAR attached. Request immediate debrief. Less than 5 minutes later, her voice came over my desktop comms, crisp and calm. My office, Colonel, now. I stood at attention in front of her desk, the panoramic window behind her, offering a stark view of the launch pads on the coast. I delivered my report verbally, my voice a clinical monotone. I recounted the facts in chronological order, without embellishment, without a hint of personal feeling. I even recited my final tense conversation with Jake, quoting his words and my own verbatim. When I finished, Colonel Lopez didn't speak for a full minute. She just watched me, her dark eyes analytical, searching. There was no pity in her gaze, only a profound professional understanding. She saw not a victim, but a fellow officer who had faced a crisis and performed her duty flawlessly. "You did the right thing, Colonel," she finally said, her voice firm. "You followed protocol, you protected a national security asset, and you saved a pilot's life, even if that pilot is a damn fool." The validation from her was like a cool drink of water after years in the desert. She stood up and walked to the window, her hands clasped behind her back as she stared out at the massive gantries. The silence stretched, but this time it was a thoughtful, strategic silence. "When is your brother's award ceremony?" she asked, her back still to me. Her tone was casual, but the question was a precision-guided missile. "This Friday, ma'am," I replied, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "At North Island." She turned around slowly, and for the first time, I saw a shrewd, calculating smile spread across her face. It was the smile of a grandmaster at chess who has just seen a path to checkmate. "Good," she said, her voice laced with a newfound dangerous energy. "I think Admiral Klein at Space Command is going to be very interested in this report. In fact, I suspect he'll be so interested that he'll want to personally and publicly thank the officer responsible for preventing an international incident." She let the words hang in the air, their weight and implication settling over me. She walked back to her desk and leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine, a glint of steel in them. "Sometimes, Colonel, the best way to teach an arrogant eagle a lesson isn't to shoot him down. It's to let him fly so close to the sun that he feels the heat, and then show him in front of everyone exactly who it was that provided the shade. A plan, a stage, a public reckoning. It wasn't just a seed of an idea anymore. It had been planted, watered, and was already beginning to grow, nurtured by the cold, righteous fury of a woman who had been underestimated one too many times. The next 48 hours moved with the speed and intensity of a tactical operation. The plan Colonel Lopez had set in motion was no longer just an idea, it was an active mission. My personal feelings of hurt and anger were compartmentalized, locked away in favor of a cold, strategic focus. I thought of Ulysses S. Grant during the Civil War. He wasn't a flashy general, but his power came from a relentless, unshakable focus on the objective. He didn't waste energy on sideline skirmishes. He just kept moving forward, applying overwhelming pressure until the other side broke. That was my philosophy now. No more arguments, just irrefutable facts, presented with overwhelming force. 2 days after my debrief with Colonel Lopez, I found myself sitting beside her in a secure video teleconference, VTC, room at Vandenberg. The room was soundproof, the air chilled to protect the sensitive electronics. On the large screen in front of us, the face of Admiral Robert Klein materialized, live from his office in the Pentagon. He was one of the highest-ranking officers in U.S. Space Command, a man whose decisions shaped the future of warfare. His face was stern, etched with the lines of decades of service, and his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He had already read my after-action report. "Colonel Carter," he began, his voice deep and authoritative, carrying the weight of his 4 stars. "Colonel Lopez has briefed me on the situation. I've reviewed your data. I have one question for you. Are you absolutely certain of your analysis that this was a deliberate, hostile act, not an equipment malfunction?" The question was a final test. I met his gaze through the camera lens without flinching. 100% certain, Admiral, I stated, my voice clear and steady. The energy signature, the targeting vector, the timing, it was all intentional. The data doesn't lie. Admiral Klein was silent for a long moment, his eyes seeming to bore right through the screen. He nodded slowly, a single decisive gesture. "Good. That's what I thought." He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "I will not have my people flying blind into a shooting war they don't even know has started. This culture of silence, of hiding these new threats in the shadows because they're politically inconvenient, it ends now. It ends with this incident." It was the definitive green light. The full weight of Space Command was now behind us. With Lopez's direction, the mission shifted into high gear. I was no longer just a victim of my family's scorn. I was the lead architect of a meticulously planned strategic revelation. Alex Reed and I worked around the clock in a secured section of the CS Pahisi. We weren't just preparing a speech, we were building a legal case, an airtight presentation of evidence for the court of public and military opinion. Alex, a true artist with data visualization, was in his element. He transformed my dry columns of telemetry and code into a stunning three-dimensional graphic simulation of the entire event. It was a masterpiece of clarity. On the screen, you could see the flight path of the Viper Squadron, represented by sleek silver F-35 models. You could see the ominous red icon of the enemy satellite moving into its attack position. Then, with chilling precision, Alex animated the invisible threat, a pale, shimmering cone, representing the high-energy microwave beam, locking onto my brother's jet. Finally, he rendered our countermeasure, the brilliant, hair-thin laser from Argus 4, lancing across the darkness of space to strike the enemy's sensors, causing the threatening cone of energy to flicker and die just moments before impact. Every single frame of the animation was cross-referenced and time-stamped against the original data logs. It was not a story, it was a digital recreation of reality, an undeniable piece of evidence designed to be projected onto the massive screens of the North Island Auditorium. The afternoon before the ceremony, Colonel Lopez called me into her office. The room was quiet, the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. She didn't say much. Instead, she handed me a garment bag. Inside was a pristine, freshly pressed dress uniform. The silver eagle of a colonel shone on the shoulders. "It was mine," she said simply, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "From when I held this rank, I think it will fit." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of pride and fierce solidarity. "Tomorrow, when you stand on that stage, you're not just representing yourself, Carter. You're representing all of us. The ones who do the work in the dark, the ones whose victories are lines of code and data points, the ones who keep the eagles flying without ever getting to feel the wind." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Hold your head high." Her words were more than an order. They were a blessing, a transfer of power. Standing there, holding that uniform, I knew I was no longer fighting a lonely battle. I had a force behind me, an entire command of silent warriors who understood the war I was fighting. My family may have seen a chicken, but my commanders, my true tribe, saw a colonel, and we were ready for the reckoning. The ceremony took place in a cavernous aircraft hangar at North Island, the vast space polished to a mirror shine and filled to capacity with uniformed officers and their families. In the center of it all, a real F-35 Lightning II was on display, its sleek gray fuselage gleaming under the powerful spotlights, a silent monument to aerial power. This was my brother's world, and today he was its king. My family sat in the front row, radiating pride. My father wore his old dress uniform, the fabric a little tight across his shoulders, but the medals still shining. My mother was in her finest Sunday dress, a floral print from an expensive Atlanta boutique. They were the picture of a proud military family. I sat 10 rows back, a solitary figure in my borrowed dress uniform, an anonymous face in the crowd. I felt strangely calm, like an observer watching the opening scenes of a play for which I already knew the ending. Jake stood on the stage, basking in the glow. A Navy admiral pinned a medal to his chest for exceptional airmanship during Operation Pacific Dawn. Jake's smile was a dazzling 1,000-watt beacon of triumph. He was the hero, he was the eagle, he was everything my family had ever wanted. After Jake's brief, confident acceptance speech, the Master of Ceremonies returned to the podium. And that concludes the awards for the Vipers Squadron. Thank you, Major Carter. He paused, looking at his notes with a hint of surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special addition to our program. Please welcome the commanding officer of the Combined Space Operations Center, Colonel Maria Lopez. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw my father lean over to my mother, his brow furrowed in confusion. He shot a quick, questioning glance back in my direction, but I kept my gaze fixed on the stage. Colonel Lopez walked to the podium with an air of absolute authority. She was poised, powerful, and in complete command. She adjusted the microphone. "Good morning. I'm not here today to talk about the battles of the past. I'm here to talk about the battles of the future." Her voice, crisp and clear, filled the hangar. She didn't speak of dogfights or G-forces. She spoke of a new domain of warfare, a silent, invisible battlefield that exists in the cold, dark vacuum of space. She spoke of threats that travel at the speed of light, of a war fought with algorithms and data streams. And then she gave the signal. The two enormous projection screens on either side of the stage, which had been displaying the Navy SEAL, flickered to life. The audience gasped. It was our 3D simulation. Last week, Colonel Lopez's voice resonated with new gravity. One of our nation's finest pilots nearly became the first combat casualty in this new war. The hangar fell completely silent. All eyes were glued to the screens, where they saw the Viper Squadron flying in perfect formation. Then a red icon representing the enemy satellite appeared, and a pale, terrifying cone of energy locked onto a single F-35. A low wave of astonished whispers swept through the room. On the screen, the call sign of the targeted jet was clearly visible. Viper 1, Jake's jet. But that tragedy was averted, Lopez continued, her voice rising with dramatic force, thanks to the decisive intervention of a brilliant strategic mind. A hero who neutralized the threat from a command center over 500 miles away, using nothing but data and a revolutionary countermeasure. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. I could feel every eye on the simulation, every mind trying to process the unbelievable scene unfolding before them. Jake, still on stage, had gone rigid. The confident smile was gone, replaced by a mask of disbelief. "That hero is with us today," Lopez declared, her voice ringing with pride. She turned her gaze from the audience and looked directly into the crowd, right at me. "Please join me in recognizing the officer who saved the day, Colonel Emily Carter." A spotlight cut through the dim hangar and found me. In that blinding white light, there was nowhere to hide. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. I focused on one thing, the steady rhythm of my own breathing, in, out, in, out. I had done the work. I had assembled the facts. Now all I had to do was let the truth have its stage. I stood up and walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the dead silence. As I approached the stage, I saw their faces. Tom Hollywood, Harris's jaw was hanging open. My father and mother were frozen in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror. And Jake looked at me, his face ashen, the color drained from it as if he'd seen a ghost. He looked utterly, completely lost. I ascended the steps and stood beside Colonel Lopez. She gave me a subtle, reassuring nod before turning to my brother. She didn't raise her voice, but she spoke with a clarity that cut through the silence, ensuring every single person in that hangar heard her. "Major Carter," she said, her voice like ice, "the colonel of Microsoft Office you mocked a few nights ago? She just saved your life." For a split second there was nothing. And then the hangar exploded. The applause was a physical force, a thunderous rolling wave of sound that shook the very steel beams of the building. Everyone was on their feet: pilots, commanders, families, the admiral on the stage, creating a deafening roar of appreciation and respect. Everyone except my family. Amid the standing ovation, they remained seated, 3 solitary figures frozen in the front row, like statues carved from shame and disbelief. After the thunderous applause finally subsided and I stepped down from the stage, the world seemed to split into 2 separate realities. The first was a whirlwind of handshakes and heartfelt congratulations. Officers I'd never met before came up to me, their eyes shining with a newfound respect. Admiral Klein himself gripped my hand firmly, his voice warm and deep. "America owes you a debt of gratitude, Colonel. Outstanding work." But the second reality was a small, silent island in the middle of the bustling reception hall. My family. They stood huddled together in a corner, isolated by a palpable aura of shame that no one dared to penetrate. They were the only 3 people in a room of hundreds who weren't looking at me. The feeling of triumph was real, but it was accompanied by an unexpected wave of emotional exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past few days began to recede, leaving a hollow ache in its place. I had won, I had been vindicated, but victory, I was discovering, felt much more complicated than I had imagined. I no longer needed an external source of inspiration. I had become my own. I looked back at the long, lonely road I'd traveled and realized my strength hadn't come from seeking their approval, but from learning to survive without it. Eventually, propelled by the weight of 100 expectant stares, they approached me. Jake came first. He couldn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. The cocksure pilot, the golden boy, was gone. In his place was a man deflated, stripped of his certainty. I'm sorry, Emily," he stammered, the words barely audible over the clinking of champagne glasses. I had no idea. His apology was a weak, flimsy thing, lost in the charged air between us. It wasn't an apology for years of condescension and cruelty. It was an apology for being publicly proven wrong, for the humiliation he was now suffering. It was for him, not for me. I simply nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, not acceptance. I didn't need his apology anymore. The time for that had long passed. My father was next. For the first time in my entire life, I saw him at a loss for words. This was the man who always had an opinion, always had a story, always dominated every room he entered. Now he just looked small. The retired A-10 Warthog pilot, the titan of my childhood, seemed lost and bewildered. I was wrong, Emily," he mumbled, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't identify. "I was so proud of my past, of the way things used to be. I guess I forgot the world has changed." It was the closest he had ever come to admitting fault, but the words felt empty. They were a confession born of shock, not introspection. My mother simply cried. Silent tears streamed down her face as she reached out and took my hand. Her grip was tight, desperate. "We're so proud of you, Emily. We really are." Those were the words, the exact words I had yearned to hear my entire life. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. What it would feel like, how I would react. I thought it would feel like a warm, healing balm. But now, hearing them spoken in this room, under these circumstances, they tasted like ash in my mouth. They had no flavor. They were a currency that had lost all its value because it had been offered too late. It came only after I had learned to mint my own, to be proud of myself without their permission. I looked at the three of them, the architects of so much of my pain, and felt a strange, profound sadness, not for myself, but for the vast, unbridgeable chasm that now lay between us. A chasm they had dug, and I had finally learned to stop trying to cross. "Thank you," I said, and my voice was calm, steady, and devoid of accusation. It was simply the voice of a woman stating her truth. "But I didn't do this for your recognition. I did it because it was my duty. It was my job." I held their gazes for a moment, letting them see the finality in my eyes. "And now," I added gently but firmly, "I need some space." I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. I gave my mother's hand a final, gentle squeeze and then let go. I turned my back on them, a simple act that felt like shifting the tectonic plates of my own life. I walked across the room, leaving my past behind, and went to stand beside Colonel Lopez, who was watching me with quiet, knowing eyes. That single step was a declaration. A boundary had been drawn. The old relationship, the one built on their terms, and my desperate need for approval was over. If we were ever to have a new one, it would have to be rebuilt from the ground up, on a new foundation. A foundation of respect, not of remittance. And it would be up to them to lay the first stone. Several months have passed since the ceremony at North Island. I find myself most mornings on a quiet, deserted stretch of beach near Lompoc, not far from Vandenberg. I stand on the cool sand and watch the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The air here is crisp and clean, filled with the salty tang of the sea. There is no longer the bitter, humiliating aftertaste of that iced tea in San Diego. There is only the sweet, clean taste of freedom. My family has tried to reach out. There have been phone calls, letters, hesitant emails, filled with words they should have said years ago. I respond to them, always politely, but with a gentle, necessary distance. I've learned that healing, real healing, requires time. More importantly, it requires boundaries. The burning anger I once carried has cooled, replaced by a deep and profound sense of peace. I have finally found my value, not in their belated recognition, but in the quiet elegance of lines of code, in the predictable grace of orbital mechanics, and in the vast, silent stillness of the cosmos. My worth was never theirs to give, and thus it was never theirs to take away. Back at the CSPOC, my world has shifted. The respect I now command is not born of a single dramatic event, but of the quiet, consistent competence I bring to my work every day. I spend more time mentoring now, nurturing the next generation of strategic minds. My current project is Alex Reed. He's brilliant, passionate, with an intuitive grasp of data that reminds me of myself at his age. But like me, he sometimes lacks confidence, second-guessing his own instincts. This afternoon, we're working on a new threat detection project, and he's hesitating over a complex piece of analysis. I stop him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't be afraid to be wrong, Alex," I tell him, my voice soft but firm. "Trust the data, but also trust your gut. It's the combination of the two that makes you a great analyst. And don't you ever let anyone tell you that the work you do in this room isn't important. It is the foundation for everything else." As the words leave my lips, I have a startling moment of realization. I'm not just talking to Alex, I am speaking across time, my voice reaching back to that lonely 17-year-old girl, standing in a sun-drenched backyard in Atlanta, clutching a certificate that no one understood. I'm giving her the validation she never received. I'm telling her that her path matters, that her dreams are not a distraction, but a destiny. In mentoring him, I am healing a part of myself I thought was long lost. My legacy, I begin to understand, isn't just about the work I do, it's about the people I empower to do theirs. Later that evening, I stand on the small balcony of my apartment, a warm mug of tea in my hands. The sky above Vandenberg is a dark velvet curtain, punctured by a million pinpricks of light. As I watch, a tiny faint streak of light glides silently across the heavens. It's one of mine, one of our nation's silent sentinels, my eyes and ears keeping watch while the world below sleeps. My family has its heroes, the eagles who paint the skies with the thunder of their engines and the smoke of their passage. Their legacy is one of daring, of physical courage, written in the language of flight. I respect it, I understand it, but it is not my language. My universe is larger, quieter, and infinitely more vast. My legacy will not be written in contrails of jet smoke. It will be written in the invisible beams of light that connect and protect us, in the silent, tireless signals that guard the guardians, in the quiet hum of data that keeps a sleeping world safe from threats it will never even know existed. I am Colonel Emily Carter of the United States Space Force, and I have finally, truly found my place. It was never in the front row of their applause. It was never in their reflection of who they thought I should be. It was always here, up among the stars. My journey brought me here, to my place among the stars. We all have our own sky to navigate, and sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who try to keep us grounded, not always out of malice, but because they can't see the universe the way we do. Finding your own light, your own truth, is the most important mission we have. This channel is dedicated to stories just like this, stories of quiet strength, of setting boundaries, and of defining our own success. If you believe in the power of these journeys, subscribe and join our community. Let's find our stars together.